for the match. It'll be draw. Oh, yeah, it'll be draw for that match.
Huh? And Jack, when they spit all over his car and
That's all.
I was ready
Where's Corey at?
Yeah, I thought today, off. No testing classroom. Turn it off.
No need to yell at me every single time.
I told you to turn it off and you kept testing.
No, I didn't. I was actually trying to find a lock and you screamed at me again.
I'm sorry. Well, you have to raise your voice.
Sometimes people
You guys need to respect them.
What order?
Yesterday, we had I thought a good discussion on the topics at issue. I thought today I would kind of review everything, put everything in a big picture, to kind of bring things together. We're getting near the end of the term, and the big picture here, okay, just as a review, 1800s Industrial Revolution, capitalists, owners of factories, their goal, big profits for themselves and their shareholders, okay? That is, that's greed, okay? Pure and simple. That's what they were after, that's what they were seeking. And the workers were treated unjustly. Low wages, long hours, 12, 14-hour working days, 7 days a week, no rest, time off to worship God. Even the wives and children had to work because of low wages to survive barely. They were not able to save money for any retirement. There were unsafe working conditions, okay? No insurance for work-related injuries, sickness, death, especially with the father. The main, I'll take questions at the end if I talk to you, okay? You have to wait. No unemployment insurance. Workers had no right to form labor unions to collectively bargain as organized group, okay, in order to pressure owners of capital in the factories to treat them justly and fairly. That was the condition of the worker back in the 1800s. Okay? And so we have Karl Marx's. Yeah, Karl Marx. Fellas, no commenting while I'm talking. Okay. If you have a question, whoever made a comment. Okay. I'm not taking questions. Well, I said I'm taking questions at the end of my presentation today. Okay. So we'll just have to be patient and wait. Okay.
It's a general question.
Well, we can wait. Okay. Karl Marx's proposed solution to the worker question. Workers throughout the world unite. Okay? That was his solution. Workers unite throughout the world, overthrow the capitalists, establish a socialist state with no private ownership of property, okay? And atheism, which refuses to acknowledge the inherent dignity and the value of man because man isn't made in God's image, he's just a cog in the wheel of the socialist state and is there to serve the state. Man is expendable. Okay? So, Pope Leo XIII, he responds to Karl Marx and also to the capitalist system in Rerum Novarum on new things and in later papal teaching. Man is made in God's image. He has inherent dignity and value. The state exists to serve man. And then this important teaching of solidarity. Okay? This is critical to understand the social charity that the church puts forth. Because we're all joined together by reason of our common humanity, And because we all have inherent dignity and value, being made in God's image, being redeemed by Christ, and destined for eternal life in the kingdom, we have a duty in justice to treat other persons with respect, with dignity, with kindness, especially those who may work for us. Okay? And especially Christians. As Christians, we should practice charity towards others on a social level. Okay? That is social charity. Now, the state also, this is the teaching of the church, the state has an obligation to protect workers from being treated unfairly because history shows, common sense tells us, those with money, power, and capital can easily oppress the workers. This was the state of things. And workers have a natural right to organize, to form labor unions. They're needed. Why? Because individual workers, you're at a disadvantage when bargaining for just wages, safe work conditions, etc., and the owners of the capital have an unfair advantage. So it's right for the workers to be able to organize and collectively bargain for the rights that they should have. Other rights of workers include a day of rest to worship God, safe working conditions, reasonable working hours, the workman's unemployment compensation if the worker is injured, unable to work for a time, unemployment insurance, so if you're out of work, one's family doesn't suffer, and a just wage. Also called a family wage, for a man to support his family, food, housing, etc., so the wife and children don't have to work. Some money can be put into savings for education of children, for retirement, things like this. That's what the worker should be paid in a not a fast food job, but a more stable job, a factory job. Okay. Now, just going through history of what happened after this, after Rerum Novarum, after Karl Marx. In the 20th century, in the U.S., workers, through unions and collectively bargaining, and through laws and regulations by the state, we had federal and state laws for health standards, minimum wages, binding child labor, tariffs to protect U.S. products where there was unfair competition coming in overseas. They gained rights, the workers did, set out by the popes. Now, this raised the consciousness, the social consciousness of people. In the 20th century, you had people realizing, oh yes, workers should be treated better. The result was generally a more just social and economic order developed over time. So by the 1950s and 1960s, and up through the mid-1970s, factory workers, other full-time positions in manual labor, like auto manufacturing, construction, were paid better wages, which it raised their standard of living so they could afford a home, a car, send their children to college, things like this, promoted the common good, the social and economic well-being of people in general, who now had better access to food, to housing, to education, healthcare. It helped build a healthy national economy. That's what it does if you're paying workers well. Because workers are paid well, they have expendable income to purchase goods that are produced. It all works well for people. And however, this is the but, we are fallen creatures, prone to sin and selfishness, and problems result as a result of these things. One is consumerism. Folks have talked about consumerism. You could say the bad habit of people buying more things they don't really need just to have the best, the newest, etc., fueled by advertising, luring people to purchase. Father John Hardin, whose cause is being put forward for canonization. I had the great honor of making a retreat under him about 20 years ago. His definition of advertising, which I've always liked, trying to get people to buy things they don't need with money they don't have. People often go into debt trying to buy things, this consumerist mentality. And then you have, as a result of our fallen nature, we have greed. Now, we're talking about a just wage and how do you, get a just wage and the rights of workers versus management. I know Seth talked yesterday, brought up the fact that people criticize, for example, the Chrysler workers here demanding too much. If you talk to the Chrysler workers, they were saying, well, we weren't demanding too much. We were just demanding what we thought was right to us. The owners of the capital were saying, no, you're demanding too much wages. Okay, so there's this struggle back and forth. Okay? You can debate that point. Okay? I mean, I've been to homes. I'm sure many of your parents or grandparents in this area, or people you know on your block, work for Chrysler. I've been to people's homes. You know, they're not extremely wealthy. They had a nice middle-class existence. You know, had a, you know, owned a home, owned a car, were able to send their kids to you know, college, whatever. They weren't wealthy by any means. They were middle class. Okay, maybe the workers were, you know, demanding a little too much. You know, that's a debatable point. Okay, there are both sides of the issue. I'm sure you could bring in labor union people here who would say, no, you know, Chrysler had enough money to pay us, and the Chrysler people say, no, they were demanding too much. Okay, that's the struggle that goes back and forth. So, admittedly, okay, sometimes on the part of workers, we have greed who demand too much from a company so that it cannot make a profit, or a big enough profit to satisfy the owners and shareholders from their point of view. Okay? Now, Pope Pius XI, he taught in an encyclical back in the 1930s, it's unjust to demand wages so high that an employer can't pay them without ruin, okay? Because that's harmful to the business. It doesn't make sense to do that. Okay? So, to be just as a worker, you can't demand too much pay from, so the owner of the business is not making any profit. That's unfair, that's unjust. Okay? We admit that. However, historically, okay, that's not been the real problem. Okay? The real problem has been the danger, bigger danger, and injustice on the part of the capitalists, the owners of the manufacturing. Beginning in the 1970s and 1980s, continuing to today, owners found they could earn bigger profits by outsourcing their manufacturing, moving their plants to other countries like Mexico, China, Bangladesh. Why outsource? Why do people outsource? What is their motive to outsource their manufacturing? Well, is it care and concern for the good of the people in other nations to raise their standard of living, promote the common good through solidarity? I don't think so. Okay? Rather, because in these other nations they can obtain cheap or slave labor in order to make bigger profits. Okay? And you know, I will quote here economist Milton Friedman. There's one and only one social responsibility of business to increase its profits. Okay? That's what he says. The senior vice president of Sears that I heard talk 20 years ago, okay, when asked about Chinese workers being exploited when they first started to go to China to build their plants, he said, I don't get involved with ethical matters. My sole concern is to increase profits for our shareholders. So, that's the view of the economists, that's the view of the corporate executives. And then, Pope John Paul II, in his encyclical on the 100th anniversary of Pope Leo XIII's encyclical, says the church acknowledges the legitimate role of profit as an indication a business is functioning well. But profitability is not the only indicator of a firm's condition. It's possible for the financial assets to be in order, and yet for the people who make up the firm's most valuable asset to be humiliated and their dignity offended. That's what happens if you're oppressing workers, exploiting them. Okay? They're humiliated. They don't have a good incentive to work. It doesn't make for a good work environment if you're not paying people a just wage. Okay? And why can they obtain cheap labor? Well, because in these nations, the workers do not have the rights that U.S. workers have. And government officials in these nations collaborate with U.S. corporate owners to keep wages low. Everyone's making a profit, except the workers. The workers are really in the same condition today in these foreign nations as our workers here in this country were in the 1800s at the time of the Industrial Revolution. There are no unions. Okay? In Mexico, in these auto plants, you don't have unions. The government will not prevent unions from being formed. In other countries, that's the same. Okay? So, unsafe working conditions. You know, an 8-story building, factory, garment factory, collapsed, killing 400 workers At a garment factory in Bangladesh, back this past summer, well, that's because the owners didn't care for the safety of their workers. Okay? There are no government laws in these countries setting safety standards, minimum wages, insurance for uninsured workers. They don't get any of this. Okay? And low wages. That's really the key here. In China, workers were first paid about 25 cents an hour. In Mexico, $1 an hour at the auto plants 20 years ago and 25 years ago. Now, $2. Okay? And in Bangladesh last year, garment workers were paid $40 a month, less than $1 a day. Now, I'll just give an example in Mexico. Workers pay $2 an hour. The car sells in the US for the same price as the car made here, where workers are paid $30 an hour. Who profits? It's not the workers. They're not profiting in this. It's the owners of the capital, the shareholders, and the government who are allowing the plants to come in. Okay? Now, capitalist wage theory is that the worker is only entitled to the wages that he accepts. And that wage, because he accepted it, is therefore just. That's a circular argument. Okay? Well, I offered you this, you accepted it, therefore it's just. No. A starving person, they come, they don't have anything, you lowball them. Okay? Oh, someone comes to my door and wants to work, you don't have money? Gee, I'll pay you $0.25 an hour. I'll squeeze the person. Well, that's not right, that's not just. Okay? Some say, well, he's better off with something than nothing. Well, that's true, but it's still not a just thing to do. That's the key. Okay? And in capitalist wage theory, there is something called the invisible hand. Okay? If the market is allowed to run itself, they say, everyone will profit and do well, so the state shouldn't get involved. Okay? Well, that hasn't proved to be the case. The state has had to get involved to assure that workers are not exploited. We have federal laws, we have state laws for minimum wages, for safe working conditions, we have OSHA. Okay? The corporate heads aren't going to make sure this is done. It takes an oversight by the government to make sure that workers' rights are protected. Okay? And, well, the fact is that workers in these countries are without bargaining power. And under duress, okay, this is all they're offered, they are forced by practical circumstances to accept slave wages because it's the only thing offered to them. The shareholders who invest their excess income, okay? I mean, I don't own shares. I have a brother who's a fireman. He can't afford to go out and buy shares in companies. He's trying just to pay the bills. Okay? Most people are doing that. Most middle-class people or lower middle-class people aren't shareholders and have all this stock. It's people with excess money that can buy the stock. Okay? So they have excess money, and they reap giant profits just saying, okay, I'll invest in this company. It's going to be built overseas, while the workers who actually do the work are exploited by being paid wages on which they barely survive. This amounts to theft of wages. It's really theft of wages. You're stealing from the workers what they deserve. Okay? Is this just? Well, you could ask. This is the gospel message. Okay? Does it respect the dignity of the human worker? Is it in keeping with the principle of solidarity, social justice, to treat workers this way? In keeping with the principle of a just wage? Does this promote the common good when you're paying workers barely enough to survive? Okay? Where, for example, in Mexico, they don't get paid enough to have running water in their homes. No. Okay? Here's the Epistle of James. Okay? Behold, the wages of the laborers you reaped from your fields, which you have kept back by you unjustly. Okay? Cry, and their cry has entered to the ears of the Lord of hosts. Okay? And Pope Leo XIII, okay, in his encyclical on 100 some years ago in 1891, he said, rich men and masters should remember this, that to exercise pressure for the sake of gain upon the indigent and the destitute, okay, and to make one's profit, right, to make one's profit out of the need of another is condemned by all laws, human and divine. To defraud anyone of wages that are his due is a crime which cries to the avenging anger of heaven. And the general rule is, whenever owners of capital, Corey, I'm speaking, okay? Silence, okay? When the owners of capital or factories have profit as their only motive, and when they care little for the concern of workers, and workers are not organized into labor unions, workers are exploited. They're denied wages and benefits, like insurance, things like this. This really comes down to theft of wages. So, on the one hand, much of the manufacturing in the U.S. has been outsourced, factories have been closed, we have unemployment. You look around the country, and we're not doing well as far as factories. On the other hand, factories operate in other countries where workers are exploited for cheap labor. Now, another thing here is that when the CEOs, the chief executive officers or the chairmen of the board, when they outsource, the shareholders vote to give them big raises because everyone's making a bigger profit. CEOs in the 1970s were paid 20 to 30 times the average worker. Okay? Today, it's 200 to 1. They're making an average of 200 times more than the worker is paid. Their wages have gone up skyrocketing because all the shareholders are saying, oh, you're making a lot of money for us. Our business is being outsourced to other countries, and we're just, the money's rolling in. Okay? CEOs in Europe, the ratio is capped. Okay? 22 to 1 in England, 21 to 1 in Germany. Okay? The government steps in and says, we're not going to allow CEOs to get these giant wages. What does that do? That prevents them from doing things like outsourcing their business, which they won't permit in these other countries. Okay. Now the big question is, okay, is there a way out of this? Okay. That's what we were talking about yesterday. Okay. Yes, Jesus wants us to apply the gospel to social and economic life. Okay. We must approach economics as if God matters, not have a godless economics. We must operate business as if God matters, guiding our decisions by the teaching of Christ and his gospel. And what the church has done is to put that teaching of the gospel and put it into a social teaching in the form of encyclicals for over 100 years. See, this is why Jesus gave his great commission to his apostles. Go out, preach to all nations, teaching them all I have taught you. The popes, the bishops, our successors to Peter the Apostles, their teaching on social matters, guided by the Gospels and the Holy Spirit on Pentecost, is what we look to. Okay? Now, here are, after our discussion yesterday, I was ruminating about this. Okay, Thomas Gambit was saying, okay, we have manufacturing plants making the same thing in China. Fine, maybe the quality can't be better, but okay, are there solutions to get out of this problem of closing our factories? They're being paid low wages. Well, okay, one is have owners and workers join together so all benefit. There's a German model, which I've read about. The auto workers in their auto plants are paid $67 an hour. There are limits. Okay? There are limits on the CEO salaries, okay? And the workers and the owners are working together, so no one's reaping a giant profit out of this. Okay, the shareholders, the owners of the company, okay, they're saying, okay, we'll get some of a profit, we'll share a good profit with our workers. They can pay them $67 an hour. They make great automobiles. If you know about German automobiles, boy, the top of the line. Why? The workers have an incentive to work very well, to be very productive. Okay, I'm being paid a good wage, I'll work very well. I'll make the best product out there so our products can compete and outsell anyone else's. Okay? That's one model. Okay? Another proposed solution, okay, is to have workers co-owners of companies with profit sharing, all sharing in the profits. When you don't have shareholders and corporate heads against the workers are owning the company. That's another proposed model. We all get together here, we form a company, and we're all going to share equally in the profits of our company. So that's a more just system. That hasn't been done in this country. There are not too many companies where that's done. My father was in a steel company where they had profit sharing. It was kind of based on this, although it was a company owned by a single individual, and he paid fair wages and offered the workers a profit. If they kept working, they would get bigger profits over the years, so then when they retired, they would get a big check and share in the profits that the company was making. That gave the workers an incentive to do well, to perform well. Now, another solution to our current problem, you could say, only permit imports of products made in other countries where workers are allowed to unionize, paid a just wage, have safe working conditions, insurance, etc. Okay? See, our government could do that. You could say, okay, the workers in Bangladesh and China, they're not allowed to unionize, they don't have safe working conditions. We're not going to allow those products to be sold in our country, or place tariffs on such products to raise the prices, to make them competitive with our workers being paid here. Okay? So that there's a level playing field, okay? So, and what would that result in? Well, then our plants wouldn't be closed, okay? Our plants could remain open, and our products could be sold here and compete with the products that are made when they're paid, the workers are paid 25 or 30 cents an hour or $40 a month, okay? That's what we did here in this country for centuries. We put tariffs on incoming products, okay? Now, you don't want to totally exclude someone from a poor country, but especially if there's injustices in another country, why not put a tariff on it? And say, we're going to raise the price of this product coming into our country because you have an unjust system. We've done this on social issues before. Has anyone ever heard of what happened? What was the big injustice in South Africa? Does anyone know? What it was called? The oppression of the blacks in South Africa. They were treated, they were excluded from the workplace. It was called apartheid. And there was a movie a few years ago with Matt Damon and where about a soccer, the country came together after apartheid ended. Does anyone know what that movie is? Yeah. It was a good movie. And that kind of gave the background after apartheid ended. Okay, but when South Africa was excluding all blacks from businesses, practicing apartheid, other nations around the world said, we're not going to buy your products, we're not going to do business with you, because what you're doing is unjust. That put pressure on the country to reform their laws, so that blacks could partake in the social system. Okay? Now I'll turn to China. Okay? And in China, okay, you have a Marxist system in place, and you have injustices going on there. Does anyone know what the gravest injustice is in China? What the government does in China? Does anyone know what it is? Okay. Have you heard of what goes on in China with population control?
Oh.
Okay. Seth,
You're only allowed 2 children?
you're allowed one child.
Oh, 1 child? I thought they
I would ask, Ron, how many brothers and sisters do you have?
I have a sister.
You have a sister, okay.
I
What,
have to pay money for
you had to pay money in order to have another child, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You're penalized for having another child. Many women in China, if they get pregnant with a second child, forced abortions. Okay? I mean, over the years, they estimate tens of millions of babies have been aborted in China. Now in China, they have about 10 to 20 million more men than women, because when children are aborted, they prefer to abort the women, because the men can work the fields and pass on the family name. That's a big problem. Okay? See, in my opinion, what we should do is say, you stop this unjust system, or we will not, I wouldn't have allowed our corporations to go over there and build plants there, because, unless that system was reformed, because it's unjust. You can put pressure on countries to do this, okay? So, placing tariffs on products to raise the prices so we can compete, our workers, level the playing field, and allow only a limited amount of imported products to be sold here, to allow our manufacturing plants to continue to employ workers. That would be more fair. Well, that's assuming that you have the good of people in mind. You're practicing solidarity and social charity, okay? Instead of just, I'm out for a profit. Okay? So we should, as citizens, being informed of what the problems are, try to work to change the system to make it more just, a just social order. And that's where these principles come into play, okay? Solidarity, social charity, the common good, okay? We have to have these principles in mind when we're organizing a business, as persons in government, okay? Some of you may own businesses one day, some of you may be in government where you can make decisions to affect people's lives, okay? I mean, I don't know about you, but I look around Kenosha and it saddens me. You know, I have people coming to me saying, Father, I can't work, I don't have a job, I can't find a job. I used to be able to walk down the street and go work in a factory. Someone told me, one of the old-time residents in Kenosha, there were about 16 or 17 big factories that have left Kenosha. Just moved out, and their business has been outsourced. Okay? What's the tool company? What is the Snap-on? Okay, they're making things in the Far East, China, Vietnam. They're making tools there. Okay, how would you like it to be a worker and show up one day and say, well, we're closing shop. We can make more money by going to North Vietnam, okay, or Vietnam. Okay, there's no North and South Vietnam, because we can make a giant profit there. We have to pay you too much, so just go home and you'll have to be on welfare now. Okay, well, is that treating people justly? Is it treating people fairly? Okay, as the Pope said, it's not only the profit that counts. It's human beings that count. They're the biggest asset in the company. Take care of them. That's what we should be trying to do to attain a just social and economic order. Okay? That's why we're teaching this class, because you're going to be the business owners and workers out there one day, okay? And to be informed that this is what we should be doing. Not just saying, make the biggest profit, and who cares about the workers, okay? What they're paid, okay? As long as I'm making more money. No, it is really theft of wages. That's what the Bible teaches. That's what the popes teach. You're stealing wages from workers when you're not paying them a just wage. Okay? So, questions or comments? I'll take them. Okay.
No.
No questions or comments? Huh? How many of you, I'm curious, have parents or grandparents that worked at Chrysler? And would you consider them, I'm just curious, would you consider them wealthy?
No.
Would you consider were they wealthy, did they have a lot of wealth?
No.
And what? Pardon me? They weren't wealthy? They are now. What? How are you going to be wealthy now? What do you mean? Missouri? Someone may have moved down in an area where their money was, ghost fraud or something. Okay. So they have a little more expendable than okay. Sure.
Are rich and guys are condemned that already.
Wait. Quick question, okay. Say it again, Thomas. If you're rich.
If you're rich and you have money, are you already condemned to hell? That's
Yes.
just I'm getting.
You don't have because you got money.
Not at all. No. Our what does Jesus Christ Well, Jesus Christ teaches, go to the gospel, okay? He condemned the rich man to hell. Why? Not for being rich,
Well, he-
but why? Because, well,
I'll tell you why,
Rich,
because
wait, just.
he didn't want to give up the money. He said, go, give everything you got, give it away, and then come serve me. He said,
Well, that's the rich young man that Jesus asked
Well-
to join him, okay?
well, I thought that's
But-
what they funny.
Okay, well, that's one story, okay? But that's not a command that Jesus put on everyone, okay? Jesus invited him to be a disciple of his, and to be a disciple of his, you had to leave everything, okay? But Jesus, in another parable, the rich man and Lazarus. The rich man ends up in hell, Lazarus ends up in heaven. Why is the rich man in hell? Not because he had riches and wealth. Jesus never said, if someone's rich, they're going to go to hell. Remember, there's the universal destination of goods. We use the goods of the earth here with a social consciousness, okay? The rich man ended up in hell. Why?
He wasn't generous with it.
Because he ignored Lazarus, who was starving outside the gate. Jesus says the scraps fell from the rich man's table, the dogs ate it, but he didn't give a scrap to Lazarus. Lazarus dies, he goes to heaven, the rich man is condemned to hell. Why? Because he had no concern for this fellow human being when he could have helped him. Okay? So I would say this to answer your question. And Jesus says, to whom more is given, more will be expected. So if someone is blessed with great wealth, okay, God is going to hold you to a higher standard and say, well, what did you do with your money? That's the parable of the talents. Okay? He gives 10 talents to one, 5 to another, 1 to another. What did you do here? I made more. Okay? The sense is not just for himself, but okay, there are a lot of people that will have great wealth and be very generous with you. Okay? They will build, help build schools, help build churches, help build cultural centers. Okay, they use their money for good purposes. So we're all going to be judged on what we do with it. We have to be good stewards of what we have. That's the idea of tithing, I said before, right, John Parker? What's tithing?
10% of what you make.
10% of what you make, give it back to God. Okay? Right off the top. Okay? And if you have extreme wealth, though, and you could afford to give 90% back, well, why not do that? Okay? Why keep hoarding money and building up big barns, like Jesus says in another parable? Okay? The man who had grain and built up big barns, he says, now I can rest and take it easy. And Jesus speaks to him and says, you fool, don't you know that your life will be taken tonight? Where's this wealth going to go? Okay? It's just been used for you, in other words. So we have a social responsibility with the goods that God gives us. We have to be conscious of that. That's part of the gospel message. Okay? So, any other comments on? Did this help to bring things together for you? I wanted to paint a picture to bring it all together so we can see and think with the mind of the church, with the mind of the gospel of Christ. Okay? So, that will be enough for today.